afternoon. Hello and welcome. My name is Emily Summer. I'm the book buyer here at East City Bookshop, and it is wonderful to be here with you all this afternoon. Thank you so much for being here in person, and thank you especially because I know a lot of you came from out of town to see Bianca, so thank you for making the trip. Thank you also for tuning into our live stream. This is being live streamed over Zoom webinar. So thank you for being here if you're watching that way. We love the accessibility that our virtual events provide, but we also love seeing you in the shop and being able to see your faces. So thank you for being here. So I have a few quick housekeeping details, 5 housekeeping tidbits to be precise. 1, thank you for wearing your masks during the event. We really appreciate that. They're optional while shopping and browsing, but we have elected to continue to ask for them when we're in a close space for an extended period of time. So thanks for cooperating with that. If you need a restroom, it is upstairs past the greeting cards and the cash register. If you're watching from home and you experience any technical difficulties, please put that in the chat. My colleague Emma is monitoring the chat and can address that if you're having trouble. We will have time for questions this afternoon, for both our in-person and our virtual attendees. So even if you're watching from home, you can drop a question in the Q&A and Emma will see those and ask on your behalf. And finally, most importantly, if you need to purchase a copy of any of the books with our author and conversation partner, those are upstairs. Actually, Jamise's books, some of hers are downstairs, all of Bianca's are upstairs. So let us help you with those if you need them. And you probably do need them because even if you have them already, signed books make the best gifts. And we will have time for a signing line at the end of the event. So now for the reason that we're here, the Witches of Moonshyne Manor. I will be honest, those of you who shop here regularly may know that I gravitate toward gritty realism. I usually shy away from anything magical, anything ghostly, and anything with witches. So this is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. But even though it has a few things that are outside of my usual wheelhouse, it has a lot of things that are squarely in my wheelhouse. Page-turning prose, hilarious dialogue, female friendships, chosen family, the lingering effects of guilt, unrequited love, questions of identity, the careful observance of motherhood and sisterhood in all their forms, and of course, smashing the patriarchy. But most importantly, what's in my wheelhouse is that it is a book by Bianca Marais. So one of the greatest privileges that we have as booksellers is not just getting to read books early, which is wonderful, but occasionally getting to meet the authors. And I was lucky enough to meet Bianca at a pre-publication event for her first book, Hum If You Don't Know the Words. So I had just read that book, fallen in love with that book, got to meet Bianca, and it's been a dream to watch the rest of her career flourish after that. So both of her previous books have much different subject matters than The Witches of Moonshyne Manor, but what they have in common is Bianca's signature warmth, humor, her ability to deal with incredibly difficult subjects in accessible, manageable, page-turning ways, and of course, fantastic writing. So I read Witches of Moonshyne Manor in one delightful, enjoyable, fantastic sitting, and I loved it just as much as her others because of, not in spite of, these wonderful witches. Bianca is also the co-host of the popular podcast, The Shit About Writing, and I know many of you love her already just as much as I do. In conversation with Bianca is another East City Bookshop friend and favorite, Jamise Harper. Jamise is an avid reader, wine enthusiast, influencer, and champion for amplifying marginalized voices. A passion for reading diverse books led her to create the hashtag Diverse Spines and Diverse Spines book community on social media, which highlights literature by Black women and women of color. She is the co-author with Jane Mount of Bibliophile Diverse Spines, which we have plenty of copies of, and the creator of Spines and Binds, a blog dedicated to book and wine pairings. We are delighted to have both of them with us today. Thank you, Bianca and Jamise. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks all of you, and welcome.
Thank you so much for coming out. I know a lot of you traveled really far, and I'm so touched by that. I do like to begin by doing a video for social media. And I normally say that if you're in a witness protection program, now would be the time to hide behind the book, but you're all wearing masks, so no one's going to recognize you anyway. So I'll start from Jamise and just stand. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be taking a video of all of you just for my social. Well today.
Hello.
Here we go.
We have liftoff. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Those of you who traveled far, I really, really appreciate it. I'd love to do a video for my social media. I'll start with Jamise and do a whip around. And if you can all pretend to be wildly enthused to see us, that would be awesome. Here we go. Start over here. Hi. Amazing. Thank you very much.
Am I on? Oh, I'm on. Okay. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited. Oh, Bianca and we're just going to do a really informal chat because at this point, we are like really BFFs.
Yeah.
We met in this store in 2019.
Yep.
And it was like 100 degrees. And I had a girlfriend said, meet me at a bookstore. And I'm like, it's too hot to go outside. And she goes, well, I'm here for this book if you want to make God laugh. And I said, oh my God, I saw this on Instagram. I'm going to just show up. I show up and I have never been as touched by an author displaying their truth and talking about their book, how they grew up. And I met her. And since that moment, we have been we talk probably once a month, if not more, through the pandemic, through everything. And I left there having not read any one of her books. I read Hum, and then I read If You Want to Make God Laugh. And I tell you, if you don't have those books, you need to get those books. They are absolutely fantastic. So thank you for asking me to be in conversation with you today. It's such an honor.
And thank you for saying yes.
So let's start by, I want to know, how are you doing? Because we still in a pandemic, but we went through a pandemic. So how did that affect you? Did you write during the pandemic, or how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I think what got me through the pandemic was writing this book, this wicked romp of a book, and also the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I started the podcast with really good intentions to give back. But like with anything you do when you're giving back, it's amazing how it boomerangs and it ends up giving you way more than you ever gave to anybody else. And so we built this community through the podcast, which has just been amazing.
The shit no one tells you about writing.
And yeah, there's a lot of
I knew
shit
that
people
before I
don't
got
tell you
asked
about writing.
Just in life. So I apologize because we were having so much fun. We were talking and we walked right by my car, and that's where my notes were like on paper. So I'm having to look at my phone. So I apologize for that. So I wanted to get us started. Give us a description of the Witches of Moonshyne Manor.
Right. So you have 6 octogenarian witches who run a distillery, Moonshyne Manor. And as what has been happening for centuries, the men of the town are coming for them because this is what has happened all the time, and they are not having it. So this whole book is about them fighting back with the help of a very unexpected little helper, 15-year-old TikToker called Persephone, who just wants to bring down the patriarchy. And it is just a joyful, madcap romp of a book with a lot of heart and soul, I think, because for me, I always write from a place of rage, Jamise, which manifests in this lovely, fun book. But that's how I challenge myself. It's like, how do I channel this rage into something fun?
So I will say, and I don't know if you guys are going to be honest, so I'm not a reader of fantasy or anything like witches, or I'm just very literal nonfiction. And coming from your other 2 books, the genre switch, how was that for you?
Yeah, and just to there we go. Can you hear me now? No? Is it on? Yes. Okay. Drop? No? Okay. So firstly, I don't really read a lot of fantasy. And also, I don't listen to podcasts. So apparently, I like to do things that I know nothing about. So lean into that. I encourage it. This was such a departure for me. So you and I have discussed how my first two novels were pretty much therapy. I couldn't afford proper therapy. And so I wrote novels, and they were very therapeutic about things that I really needed to, work through. And they were hard. And I cried a lot, and it was tough. This book, I felt like there were these 6 witches out in the world, and they were kind of circling a whole bunch of different writers to figure out who they were going to trust their story with. And it's like they walked up next to me when I had a glass of wine. Of course I did. And they run a distillery. And they were like, okay, she looks like she can have some fun. And it was like a fever dream. They sat me down and they cracked the whip. They were like, listen, Missy, this book is not going to write itself. Put your bum in the chair and write this book for us. And it was just glorious, because as writers, we make a lot of shit up. We do. That's what we do. We just make things up, right? But this book, because I wasn't constrained by history, by what was happening in the world at the time, I got to make up so much stuff, and it was just so fun.
So let's talk about that, because I think we had a conversation on one of my IG lives when your book came out, If You Want to Make God Laugh. You talked about not wanting to write from the perspective of Black women anymore, right? So when I saw this book, I thought, okay, so let me see what she's going to talk about now, because you specifically said, you don't want to write someone else's story anymore. So that's a departure from that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my first 2 books were an exploration of white people coming to grips with their own racism. So growing up in South Africa during apartheid, I say that I was pretty much brainwashed by my society to be racist, because that's what a regime like apartheid does. But I could not write those books just from white characters' perspectives, because all you would have gotten was privileged, bratty little white girl expecting everyone to do her bidding, and there would be no growth at all, So those books I needed to write from the perspective of Black characters, which I aim to do very respectfully and with a lot of humility. And then I had conversations with many Black authors in South Africa who said, look, we don't have a problem with what you wrote at all. You did it justice. You got sensitivity readers. We were on board with that. But here's the thing. You are being published internationally. We are living this experience, and we cannot be published outside of South Africa. And I was like, okay, I don't want to be a part of the problem anymore. I want to be a part of the solution. Having said that, there is nothing worse for me than picking up a book and reading it, and the book is just a bunch of middle-aged white women. There is no diversity in it. So for this book, I wanted a diverse cast.
A diverse cast.
Very diverse cast. And who are asexual, bisexual, pansexual. We have transgender people. We have cisgendered people, etc. We have white people. We have Black people. So I wanted a diverse cast. But first and foremost, this is not a book about racism. The Black characters do experience racism, and there are a few lines about that, but this is about their identity as witches or other things that they identify with.
So before we dive into the book, because we're going to dive into the book, but without spoilers, because we don't want to spoil the book. But I will say this, your stories, even though this was a departure from what your first 2 books were, I always, and I've said this to you, I still experience the humanity of the people, the tenderness, the wisdom of the characters. So that did not change, even though it was a different genre, and even though you decided to write it from a different perspective. So my question to you, talk about what you've done since that shift, because I know you have the Eunice initiative. And if you guys don't know who Eunice is, I'm sure she'll tell you, but talk about what you've done, like you said, to help people get published and to bridge that gap.
So I began the Eunice Ngogodo Own Voices initiative. So Eunice was my childhood caregiver. She inspired me to write If You Want to Make God Laugh and Hum If You Don't Know the Words. The books were dedicated to her. I was in South Africa 2 months ago, and she turned 99, and I got to see her, and it was just so incredibly special. And I'll never forget when she read the dedication to her of Hum If You Don't Know the Words. She said to me, "Why me, my dear? I was no one special. I was just a maid." And that broke my heart, because how do you say to somebody who has been the single biggest influence in your life that they shaped everything about who you are, that without her in my life, I don't even want to know who I would be. I think I would meet me and I would not like me very much without her. So, you know, to explain to her that you don't need to be a politician or a famous person to change the world. And she changed my world. And to pay tribute to her and to stop being a part of the problem, I started the Eunice and Gogodo Own Voices initiative, where we are empowering young Black women in South Africa to be able to write their own stories. And then, of course, COVID hit and resources were needed to just feed people, never mind have them write, you know. So a lot of our time and effort and fundraising went towards that. But I've worked with an independent publisher in South Africa, Blackbird Books, who is run by South Africa's first Black woman publisher, Tabiso Mhlape. She is a force to be reckoned with. And I've sort of formed an alliance between them and then a Canadian independent publisher who now is bringing these South African titles to North America. Because every time I spoke to book clubs, they would go, recommend South African books. And I have a ton, but you can't get them here, which is so frustrating, you know? So that's now my focus is trying to do that.
So did you come up with this title and have these witches run a distillery, and because of your friendship with me? Because I'm thinking that's pretty much what we talk about all the time is wine or a cocktail. And I'm just curious, what was your inspiration for this lovely story?
It was not you, although it should have been you. You know, character always comes to me first. Above a premise, because I find if you come up with a plot as a writer, your characters become puppets and you are just manipulating them through an obstacle course as they carry out these things you need them to do. So character always comes to me. And the characters who came to me first were Ruby and Ursula. And I don't want to give too much away. It was just these women in their 80s who had been lifelong friends. There was a lot between them. And then there was this sort of loss of memory and identity. And for me, identity is so fascinating because each one of us today, if I said to you, who are you? Define yourself. You're going to define who you are based on your relationships, your career choices, your interests, your past, the things that have shaped you. But if you can't remember that anymore, then who are you? What happens to that identity? And can the people who love you remember you back to yourself? And so that's what I wanted to write about. And then I was like, yeah, but that's going to be a bummer. You know, that's not really a cheerful book, is it? And then I saw a picture of this haunted house. And suddenly I was like, witches. Okay, a haunted manor, a whole bunch of them, not just two of them. Boom, 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 boom. The dominoes fell. And that was the genesis for the idea.
Yeah, because when I started reading, I'm thinking, why witches? And then not so much why witches, but I love that they're 80 and you're talking about them in the later part of their lives. You could have talked about them. They met when they were 6. And so they have the sisterhood all the way through. You could have taken us through the whole gamut of their lives, but you talked to us when they're 80. Was that deliberate?
Very deliberate. And to answer your earlier question, why witches? You know, witches were the first feminists. They were women who refused to follow the path that was expected of them: marriage, children, having a husband, control their finances, etc. And what witches were people who had taken this knowledge that had been passed down to them by their grandmothers in terms of healing, in terms of childbirth, in terms of, you know, recipes to help with menstrual cramps and all these kinds of things. And they were helping other women, but they were doing it on their terms. And of course, nothing is more threatening to the patriarchy than a woman who is living on her own terms. And that is why witches were persecuted. So that's why witches. But in their 80s, you know, we as women have grown up our whole lives with magazines, beauty magazines, whatever. And there's always these quizzes, right? So which member of the Babysitters Club are you? You know, which character from Sex and the City are you? Which character from the Golden Girls are you? And then boom, there's nothing. It's like we stop existing after that age. And something that irritates me so much is the amount of criticism we take as women for simply breathing and getting older. How dare we get wrinkles? How dare we go gray? How dare we look older? Why aren't we covering our gray? Why aren't we doing this with makeup? Why aren't we losing weight? Why? And I hate that, because the amount of time and energy we spend on that, we could be taking over the world. And so, I wanted to show these women who were not defined by their relationships. Because something else, when I say I write from a place of rage, is let's say a young woman goes missing or something happens to a young woman. We hear, oh, she was someone's daughter. She was someone's wife. She was someone's mother. And I'm like, hell no, she was herself. She doesn't have to be someone's mother or someone's daughter for it to be a tragedy. So why are we as women constantly defined by our relationship to other people? And I wanted to show witches who didn't have children, didn't have mothers, weren't married. They were just themselves. And they have just grown older. Yes, they've lost a lot of their power because they're older, but the wisdom that they have accumulated in that time, and they are still fierce and kick ass. And I wanted this book to be a celebration of aging and diversity and all of these things.
I say it's a beach read that transitions to the fall with like a little bit of
So champagne with pumpkin spice. That sounds revolting.
Forget about the mic. So how did you come up with the names and the correlating descriptions of the characters?
So the names evolved because I realized very quickly that I trust my reader very much. I trust my reader to be smart. I trust them to be able to make connections and get what I'm saying. But this was a huge ensemble cast. And I realized early on that I was expecting them to deal with a lot very quickly, and that wasn't fair. So I had to do some of the heavy lifting, and then they could do the rest of the heavy lifting. So you hear the name Jezebel, you just know, she's sexual. She's, enjoying her sexuality, even as she's getting older. Queenie, she's the queen. She's in charge. Her original name was Sybil. Ivy, you think of Ivy and you go, okay, plants, nature. And she's the botanist witch who runs the conservatory. Originally, she was called Zelda. And so, as I came to grips with each of these women's personalities, for me, what fascinates me about human nature is our flaws. It's the ways in which we kind of broken and imperfect, but still get up every day and get out of bed and still do our very best. So for me, each of the witches, their kind of flaws came to me and their particular powers. And then I filled in the blanks. So for example, full disclosure, I am almost 100% Queenie, who, for those of you who haven't read the book, she's an A-type control freak Capricorn. And so I go, what is the worst thing for someone like me? And it's like, oh, to be out of control and to let other people down. Like, I hate that. I hate letting people down. And so that came to me as kind of Queenie's Achilles heel, letting other people down. But the very first character that I developed was the manor, because the manor looms so large, so much takes place in it. So I had a friend who drew up all the floor plans for me. I imagined how the manor would be. And once I had that, I was able to go to each of the witches. And, they are also important in their own right, but how they work together as a sisterhood is so vitally important, because we all know relationships with our friends as women. We will be so fierce and stand up for our friends. And if anybody disses them, and if they diss themselves, we're like, but also when you know somebody so well, you've got the power to really hurt them, right? Because you know which buttons to push. And so I wanted to show female sisterhood and friendship in all of its glorious, messy manifestations.
I like when an author takes the setting and make it a character. I absolutely love this. So the manor definitely was a character. So I want to ask you about, let me go back down here. You explore sisterhood, like in all sisterhood, motherhood in all of your books, right? And the bond between women. So talk a little bit about, the friendship, the loyalty, how your own personal friendships have played a role in how you write sisterhood and motherhood in books.
Yeah. So, for me, found family is so fascinating, because biological bonds, this is evolution, right? You give birth to someone, you're meant to love them. You are meant to look out for them, etc., etc. But found family for me, because that's our choice. And in the book, the manor chooses which of these girls to bring together. I think there's a description that the manor's like a cat who brings a mouse and drops it at its master's feet and is like, here you go. Okay, the little girls were less gross than a bleeding mouse, but you get my, you get what I'm trying to say here. But yeah, in terms of the sisterhood, Ivy, for example, is inspired by my best friend. She lives in Edinburgh. We've been best friends since school. She's a naturopath and a homeopath. And I'm just in awe of her and how many people she heals. She has people from across the world who will come and see her about Alzheimer's, because she's put together something that helps put Alzheimer's back. And that is just amazing. And when I look at her, I am in awe of her. But you know how many times she will kind of speak badly about herself to me and feel like she doesn't measure up, etc. And that's another thing about women that I hate. Why are we always beating ourselves up? And I'm just as guilty as the next person. And my whole mantra has been, if we could see ourselves through the eyes of our best female friends, we would love ourselves so, so much. And if we could grant ourselves the same grace that we granted each other, how much happier we would all be.
That's so true. So how long did it take you to write the book? And I think you said that it was a good escape for you because the world was so shitty.
It was,
Is.
yeah, well, yeah, it was even worse then. I mean, Toronto had a lockdown. We were stuck inside. It was the middle of winter. Everything was dark and there were riots happening. And, the world, it was just like, what the hell is going on in the world? I don't want to be a part of this world right now. I want to go somewhere else. So I think the first draft was very much like a fever dream. It took me about 5 months. And if you consider that my first novel took me about 2.5 years, that was really, really fast. It was just, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like, and the writers in the room will know, you are sitting down every day with your imaginary friends. They are like your best imaginary friends. And when you come out of that, it feels weird to interact with people in the world. I'll never forget the once, it was a different book, but I was brushing my teeth and I turned to my husband and I said, so-and-so is pregnant. And he said, that's wonderful. And then he went, who is so-and-so? And I was like, oh no, it's the person in my book. And because it felt so real as I had that realization. And he was just like, that's great. Who is that? Do they want to be pregnant? So yeah, it was just a fever dream of spending so much time with these women. And I wish I could live at the manor. That's why in the dedication, I say, I call dibs on the treehouse bedroom. That's mine. The rest of you can stay wherever the hell you want, but that one's fine.
So I'm looking at the time.
Oh yeah, and the rage room. Yeah. So
many things. So how many people have read it? Okay. Oh, the mic. Thank you for reminding me, Nia. There are so many themes in the book. The feminism, the body positivity, racial identities, everything in the book. And I want to know, with all the characters that you have, how do you keep everyone straight? Because to me as a reader, it flows. It's very fluid. It doesn't seem like you miss a beat with anything. And this has a lot of characters in it. So how do you keep the characters straight?
Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly don't know. Maybe because I've spent so much time with them up front that I know them so well. Like I don't get them confused. And real people in my life always inform my characters. It's a bit of this one, a bit of that one, a bit of me in all of them. So, perhaps I relate them to kind of the people I know in my real life. But yeah, they it's like saying, how do I keep my 3 best friends separate? Like, right. I know who the hell they are. And I knew who the hell these women were because they told me. And they were just so singular and just so very different. And they were like puzzle pieces because when they slotted together, they were so powerful. But individually, you could see on that puzzle piece exactly who each person was.
So I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to open it up to audience questions. One aspect that I really, really love, which rings true to today, the youth, our future. And so I love that the mayor's daughter, was standing up and being like, forget these old ways. We're going forward with new things, new ideas. And so can you talk about that? Because I thought that was really, really important. Maybe people didn't read into it as much as I did, but I just thought, wow, this is great because her father's the mayor, which means he's probably older. One of the men and powerful. Yeah. And his daughter is the one standing up against the men that are coming for these witches.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of nieces and nephews, and they just blow me away in terms of how they school me and their parents and their idealism. I think of us at 15. You know, you thought you knew everything and you thought you had so much power because you know what you did. And then somehow life happens and we start to forget that. Mm-hmm. We forget that, you know, look at Eunice, just a maid can change the world. And we give away our power. And I wanted to explore this intergenerational aspect and show this young girl who was so idealistic and so powerful in her own way that she was going to stand up against the patriarchy. And it didn't matter that nobody else belonged to her feminist association. Yeah. It didn't matter that she couldn't get any of her friends to join with her. She was still going to have it with her dog, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And there's 2 members of the feminist association. And look at how much she changes the story. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a part actually where they're doing a very convoluted spell. And some of the ingredients is like a gallon of rhinoceros urine and the eyelash from a ruling monarch and some very rare frog spit. And Persephone is horrified. And she's like, I hope these were all ethically sourced. I hope this is fair trade rhinoceros pee. You know, and of course the older women are like, what are you talking about? Because they wouldn't think about that, but she cares about that.
I was going to ask you about the spells and the brews, the recipes. So any questions? I'm going to repeat your question just so the people in the hybrid section can hear. Hybrid section, listen to me. No question? Yes.
All the spells and everything as well, especially if you said you're not usually a fantasy reader. How did you come up with all of those?
So the question is, if you weren't a fantasy reader, how'd you come up with all the spells?
So I made a lot of shit up. But also I started doing research because I wanted to pay tribute to the grimoire, because a grimoire for a witch is nothing but this repository of information that has been passed down through the oral tradition by so many women who came before, because many of these women were not taught how to read and write. And so the only way they could pass this information down was verbally, until one person in the generation was able to write these things down. So that's why I have all of that in it, was to pay tribute to that. But I had to do a lot of research. And then afterwards, I still sent it. I hired someone who's a homeopath and a naturopath to look at it, all of it. And, you know, there are recipes in there for very natural lube, feminine lube. And when this woman read this, she was like, you made a mistake here, which can cause a lot of burning sensations for women's hoo-hoos. And I was like, oh, don't want to do any damage to hoo-hoos. So then I was like, okay, how do I fix this, right? And then I fixed it. And then I tried all these things myself, because I was like, if anyone's hoo-hoo should be damaged in the making of this book, it should be mine and not someone else's. And then there are other recipes that are clearly not meant to be, you know, if you can source the rhinoceros pee, go ahead. I feel like Charles will be less inclined to give the eyelash than maybe Liz was. But yeah, go ahead.
Anyone else? Yes. So the question was, she's curious about your time management with the podcast and all the writing you do, and then life in general.
I struggle with work-life balance. It is this Capricorn thing. I always overwork. And so I didn't have any balance in the last year. I loved the podcast so much that I spent way too much time on it, like 4 days a week, just working on bonus episodes in the podcast. And so I didn't write for the longest time. And I was working nights and weekends. And I got to a very bad burnout point. And then that was my wake-up call. And so for me, my whole life is a challenge of doing the things I want to do, being able to say no to things, not because I don't want to do it, just because I don't have time. And I really struggle with that. So, this last year has been a teacher in itself, just learning how to go, how can I give back? How can I do this? How can I manage time for myself? So, when people say, oh, you're so inspiring because you do so much, I'm like, don't be inspired by that. It is not a good thing, because with it comes a lot of sacrifice. And so, it's really just finding the balance, which is why you may have noticed we don't have all the bonus episodes anymore on the podcast. We now really, to call something a bonus episode and do it every single week kind of takes away from the bonus part, right? Because then it's a podcast that has 2 episodes a week. So yeah, and Carly and Cece have been wonderfully supportive of that. And of course, Cece is, because she's my agent and she wants to sell another book. And I need to be able to have time to write another book so she can sell it. So it's finding my way. Yeah.
It's interesting because whenever I hear women talk about having a hard time to say no, I always say no is a complete sentence. It's not a comma. It's not a semicolon. It's a period. There's nothing else that needs to be said. Wow. Any other questions? Oh, wow. Let's go. Yes.
Curious about your writing in general, but also specific to this book. How do you know when an idea is like the one that you want to commit to, and like this is going to be the next novel, right?
Yeah, good question. Because that's
a good question. So the question is, how do you know when an idea actually is going to be a book? This is what I'm going to write about.
Yeah. So in the last year, even though I haven't had time to write, really, I've started 2 different novels. One was a psychological thriller. One was an expansion of my Audible original, The Prune Viper. I was expanding that into a novel. Both of them I kind of put on hold. For me, when I know it is the book, it becomes all-consuming. It is like there's champagne in my blood. It effervesces.
Everything goes back to alcohol.
Oh, it really does. It really does. Somebody said to me, why don't the witches ever eat in your book? Why do they just drink? Oh, I've got to fix that. No, it becomes so all-consuming. I am talking to them in my head all the time. When I walk, I can't listen to an audiobook, or I can't listen to a podcast because the ideas just keep coming. And my husband says he knows when I've gotten to that point when we are watching television and I pause and I go, just a second. And he thinks I've gone to the bathroom. And 3 hours later, he's still sitting there staring at the same pause screen because I went to just go jot down a note. And then I ended up writing a chapter. So it's like I don't have a choice.
Very similarly, are you working on it? No.
Oh, can I interrupt there? So we went to lunch before here. I got a secret. I was told that there may be a sequel to Hum. But caveat, that was just like a thought. Maybe.
That sounds to me like clickbait. But what I did say was, if I ever did do a sequel to Hum, I would want to write it in partnership with a young Black South African writer who I would be writing the chapters from the white character's perspective, and they would be writing from another character's perspective. And that's how we would do it. For many of you who've read The Personal Librarian, I was so inspired by these authors and how they did it and how they managed to bring their own 2 experiences to telling this kind of story. So that was that. It's definitely not in the cards. We shall see one day. Yeah. It's effervescing. In terms of what I'm now wanting to write, I realize that if I do a psychological thriller and a this and a that, my readers are going to be so confused unless I publish under pseudonyms, right? Because they pick it up and it's like South African literary fiction, and now there's sexy older witches, and then it's, someone being murdered and stabby. So I was like, okay, so what I'm thinking of doing is I've got an idea in mind. It is Knives Out meets Succession, but with magical people. And that is currently busy effervescing. And I'm taking all the notes and I'm stopping conversations and going, just a second, I need to make a note. And I'm hiring an artist at the moment because there's something that's going to be very important to the book and the book structure. And I need to get that sorted out, almost like doing the floor plans for the Witches of Moonshyne Manor. And once I have that, I think I'm going to be off to the races.
It does. you're really going with the fantasy thing.
I had so much fun with this one.
Yeah.
And the thing about magical people is they don't have to deal with the nonsense we have to deal with. Somebody bugs you, you just like whip out a toad spleen and you're like off with your head. It's awesome. Sorry, there was another question.
Yes. Yeah.
Having a heart attack can help you out with anything. So my question was, like, at what point you know when Mr. Friends and Twins is supposed to build the world as part of your story? How do you pitch that? How do you get the idea of that? And how do you know what to keep? And does it reframe the way you're telling the story, the characters you created?
Okay, you got to help me. How do you know when to enlist your friends for help to help you with the story? How do you know what to keep and what not to use?
And how does that shape?
And how does it shape the story?
I am a big advocate of seeking out experts in different areas. For example, I cannot do my own taxes. My husband's in banking. He does that. My cooking's appalling. He does that. But there are other things that I'm expert at, and so I do that. So I'm a firm believer of leaning into your own strengths, but also seeking out knowledge, because people are fascinating. The things they know and how generous they are with sharing that. So whether it's writing a chapter and sending it to my writing group and saying, please tell me what you think, where am I going wrong? Or whether it's going to someone and saying, how do I not burn hoo-hoos? Or whether it's saying to my bestie, Brendan, and saying, you're a graphic designer. I don't know how to draw floor plans. Will you help me with that? Seriously, ask people for help. A lot of people I will pay for that help, or I take them out for dinner, or I pay them in whatever. But seriously, like, you don't know what you don't know. And the only way to find out what you don't know is to enlist help and to ask other people questions and to get their input. And it does shape my work so much. At one point I had 2 rooms next to each other, and Brendan was like, but there's no supporting wall. Like, this whole house will come crashing down without this wall. And I was like, oh, I didn't think of that. No. And then I was like, magic holds the wall up. And then I was like, no, that's a cheat. And then, that's just a small example, but often somebody will say something. So the psychological thriller that I wrote, those of you who listen to the podcast will know I spent 2 years on one, and then we didn't sell it because somebody beat me to the idea just before. But when I was visiting my bestie in Edinburgh, I went to the University of Dundee, and there was a woman there who is an expert on fire and poison. She is like the CSI equivalent in Scotland. Her name is up on the airport wall in Scotland. And I said to her, I want to kill somebody in this book, but I don't want them to have poison. I'm thinking that they ingest the poison like through their skin. Is there a substance that can make them absorb this poison faster? And she was like, 1, if your husband dies in this way, I'm reporting you to the police. And 2, she told me exactly how to do it, which was amazing. But she also told me where I went wrong. And she was like, it can't happen this way. It has to happen this way. And so that shaped the story. It changed the story. So 100% get in help, ask people, do it.
Yes.
Right. Just know how the characters are going to do, or is it a surprise to you?
When you write, do you know how the book is going to end, or is it a surprise to you?
I am not a plotter. I tell all my creative writing students to plot because it makes their lives easier. And then I'm a complete hypocrite and I don't plot at all. So here's the thing. If I know how the story is going to end, I have zero desire to write it. I'll go, these are the characters. Let me see if this scenario works. And then I write to see what's going to happen. And I figure if I'm surprised, my readers are going to be surprised. If a character suddenly says to me, woohoo, I've kept the secret and this is what I'm telling you, I'm like, oh man, that's so cool. And then my readers always say to me, I got to this part and that was so cool. So yeah.
Sure.
In what ways has hosting a podcast informed it?
And so this is from the audience. In what ways has hosting a podcast informed or aided your writing?
It has made me such a different writer. Just explaining concepts to listeners. So, for example, I'll interview an author and they'll say something in passing. And then I'm like, no, wait, we need to break that down so that we can really understand that. And I have probably more light bulb moments while I'm listening to them than our listeners do. I'll be like, oh, wow, I didn't think about that before. Wow. Okay. So this is what I did in the one book without realizing it. How do I lean into that for the next book? So again, I think that when we teach others, we become so much better at it ourselves. And I really think I'm a better writer for having started the podcast.
What made you start the podcast?
There were two things. That summer of COVID, all of our stuff got canceled. So I was sitting around twiddling my thumbs and I couldn't go anywhere. So one of it was boredom. Two was in that week, I had 4 different people reach out to me on social media to ask me pretty much the same question about publishing. And I was answering the same question and I was going, how do I reach more people with this? Because they really need this knowledge. Like they're desperate for this answer and I can give it to them, but surely there's a way to give it to more people. And, I remember when we got to, I got 100 downloads. I was like, 100 people downloaded my podcast. It was mostly friends and family who were terrified of me. And so they downloaded it. It was like, so that they could tell me they did. And you guys will be the very first to know that last night we hit 1 million downloads. We're actually going to be announcing that later today. So that has been amazing.
So this book seems like it came out spectacularly fast, quickly, for the publishing. You talked about the first half was 5 months. Can you tell us kind of the rest of the timeline?
It was, I can't believe how fast the publisher did this, because most publishers, a book that comes out today was bought sort of 1.5 to 2 years ago, was written 2 years before that. So these things take ages. And when we went out on submission with this book, the editor said, I absolutely love this. I want it to come out for next Halloween. And she said it's virtually 100% polished. She wanted me to revise 1 or 2 of the early chapters. And she said, if you could turn that around quickly, we can bring it to market quickly. And I was quite worried because I was like, will they be able to do enough marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And the book has now been on the Canadian bestseller list for 3 weeks, which is amazing, but it's an excellent team. I say it takes a coven to bring a book out into the world. And this coven worked their butts off. Yeah.
It's awesome. So I think we're going to go to one more question. Oh, yep, sure. That was in my nose. Which of the witches were the most challenging to write?
I would say Ursula. Ursula's very complicated. She's very complex. She's dealing with a ton of guilt. She's a wonderful human being who perhaps didn't do good things, and she's had to live with the consequences of that. But she also keeps these secrets because of it. So she was difficult to get into. Jezebel was just so fun to write. Hilariously fun. And Queenie was the easiest because that's me. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to remind everyone that Bianca's gonna be signing books, and for people that are online, she's gonna sign books. So please call in to place orders online for the books of all 3 of her books. Correct? Yes. So thank you guys so much. This has been great.
Jamise, thank you so much. What an absolute joy being in conversation with you. Didn't she do an amazing job?
Yes.
Yay. Please get her book. It makes an amazing, amazing gift. And then after this, there is apparently hilariously a bar called Fight Club nearby. And for any of you who would like to just come and have a drink with us, for me, community and networking is important. So there are people here who listen to the podcast. There are bookstagrammers here. I want to introduce you all to each other, and let's go and chat. So if you're able to do that afterwards, please go there. Jackie and Katie, will you two please stand up? They will be going there because we weren't able to reserve a table or anything. They will get there and carve out a space. So when you get there, look for the two of them. Okay.
Thank you so much to Bianca and Jamise. If you're here in the store and you want your book signed, as I said, if you'd like to purchase a copy, you can go upstairs to do that. My coworkers who are down here can instruct you where to find Jamise's Diverse Spines and the Diverse Spines Journal. And give us just a minute. We will be pulling a table up and getting ready for the signing line. So thank you all for being here. And mostly thank you to Bianca and Jamise. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to this amazing, amazing bookstore for hosting, and Emily. And you don't have to buy our books. My Witches won't hex you if you don't. But please browse the store and buy other books. They make excellent gifts. Thank you.